Greetings, conservatives. This is your humble host, John Moraga, and we are back with more ConservaCast. We look forward to keeping you informed with the latest and most relevant commentary of conservative issues. So without further ado, here are a few topics I'd like to discuss.
Hey folks, just a quick reminder. This is the season of giving, so if you haven't already, please consider contributing to our efforts by visiting GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner, GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner, or you can visit our website, ConservativesCorner.com, by clicking on Order and either purchasing one of our beautiful, majestic mugs, or an annual subscription, or making a contribution there. We hope you've enjoyed some of our media and our articles and vlogs on ConservaCast, and we want to keep you up to date on the most relevant conservative issues of the day. That being said, we do need your support in order to continue these efforts and to continue championing conservatism. That being said, today I'd like to address a few things about the political landscape of the recent past, and mostly about what to expect coming up. But I want to start off by saying that our perspective of conservatism, as many of you may know, is based on three pillars: biblical precedent, natural law, and federalism. And the reason why I bring that up, most of you who have heard these ConservaCasts before are familiar with that, but I bring up the specific pillar of biblical precedent, mainly because the vast majority of conservatives do believe in some type of God or theology. Specifically, the majority of them are probably Judeo-Christian, evangelical Christian, but among the ranks there are many Jewish believers and even some who may not actually believe in a specific God, but have a type of God conscience. Admittedly, there are a small number of even atheistic conservatives, but the vast majority of conservatives that we reach are believers in some type of God. And the reason why that's important is that if we look at our political landscape, our ultimate happiness does not rest on any political outcome. Whoever is in power, whoever is running any local or national government, ultimately we know that our solace should be in God. Now, obviously, for some of you who know some history, Jews throughout ancient history have been persecuted by the governing powers that be, whether it was in ancient Egypt or Babylon. And the idea of placing our faith in any type of governmental power is very, very misplaced. Fast forward even into still ancient history, but still more recent than some of the Jewish persecutions of ancient times, the Christians were also heavily persecuted and even martyred at the hands of the Romans and others around the world. Nero being thrown to the lions or being put up on stakes and burnt in order to light city streets. And so the idea that as people who believe in God, people of faith, we understand that our comfort, our ultimate happiness, doesn't rest on those who are in governmental power. Now, obviously, it goes without saying that we would prefer to have our lives be a little bit more comforted by those who may be in power, who have a similar worldview as we do. But it is because we don't place ultimate faith in them that if we look at what happened in 2016, many conservatives and people of faith would have been extremely and understandably upset that Hillary Clinton would have won and beat Donald Trump, as many people had projected she would. A lot of evangelicals and most of you who are hearing this were probably bracing for that outcome. Now, it just so happened that even though Donald Trump wasn't the perfect candidate, he was ultimately in stark contrast to Hillary Clinton, and still remains so. But even had she won, it's important to realize that if you are a sincere person of faith, we would have been able to weather even that presidency. It wouldn't have been pleasant. The outcome would have been extremely undesirable. The left-wing agenda would have been even further progressed. And I mean, the list of things that would have been extremely, extremely horrifying are too long to take time to invest repeating right now. But my point is that ultimately we would have even weathered that. Now, in retrospect, as I've discussed on these ConservaCasts before and even written about in articles, in retrospect, it has been, surprisingly, a better presidency with Donald Trump in office than I think many of us may have expected. Now, that is obviously not to say that I don't have some disagreements and I don't have some still very strong reservations about the man, but he has definitely done a lot of things that I didn't think he would do or keep his word on doing. And again, I've discussed this in previous ConservaCasts and articles that I've written. But my point is, moving forward, we have to consider now that one of the main reasons I believe Trump actually did win was not that he was that great, but Obama and Hillary and the left were really that horrible. Now, let me repeat. Trump wasn't that great, but Obama, Hillary, and the left were just that horrible. Now, because Trump was a relative political novice, he couldn't have had a better candidate to go against. And I mean better in the pure objective sense of the term, and that he had the best advantage over her, Hillary Clinton, that is, because she had so many things going against her. Besides just her own personal issues of legalities with her emails and her Benghazi conspiracy and cover-up, her decades of involvement with her Clinton Foundation, and I mean it just I could do a whole episode, a ConservaCast episode on this, and there's obviously many commentators, and I don't need to point out all of the points against Hillary. In fact, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, is that her negatives were so well known. Just her personality, she barely campaigned, taking things for granted that she would win. There are so many negatives against her as a candidate, as a person, that I don't need to explain them all to you listening. But beyond that, beyond just her, she represented the Obama administration, basically another extension of his administration and his politics. Obviously, she was not the same person and couldn't do the exact same things. But because she was part of the same Democrat Party and the growing progressive ideology of that party, she represented what would be entering the White House had she won. And so she had to carry Obama's legacy, quote, legacy, end quote, around her neck like an anvil. Whether she wanted to or not, the politics of political parties is that you are basically carrying the baton of your predecessor. And because of that, Obama had even more things to dislike. Because he was in office, because he was able to enact his agenda. It wasn't just what he could have done, but what he did. Mainly the big things like Obamacare, the Iran nuclear deal, the releasing and emptying of Guantanamo Bay with terrorists, his backtracking on the Defense of Marriage Act, his, I'm not going to spend time on all of the litany of things that he did to this country. But over the course of his 2 years, it was pretty apparent that obviously the far right and conservatives and those who had more traditional ideas and values did not like President Obama. I mean, we saw the rise of the Tea Party in 2010 because of his insistence on carrying out things like Obamacare and other policies. And so he just continued to basically run his administration pushing away independent voters. Now, albeit he did get reelected, but Republicans didn't exactly put up the best candidate either in 2012 with Mitt Romney. And historically, an incumbent president has an advantage to be reelected unless they've done something to upset even their base. And I don't want to address George H.W. Bush so soon after his passing, but just to address some of the objective history of things. I remember living through his campaign to be reelected, and the big thing that prevented him from being reelected was famously his backtracking on one of the most famous lines in political history, which was, "Read my lips, no new taxes." Now, that wasn't just the only reason. There were a number of other things, but again, I don't want to rehash the history of that so soon after his passing, but just the idea that that was a main breaking point where he lost even his base at the time to support him, which Clinton didn't do when he got reelected, Reagan didn't do when he was reelected, Obama didn't do when he was reelected, and just the pattern in history of things. Obviously, politics is always changing, and there's always exceptions, but because Obama didn't alienate his hardcore base and backtrack on something that he promised to do for them, he was able to be reelected even though he was losing a lot of the middle America, a lot of the independent voters. And, so combine the element of Romney not being the best candidate, combine the history of incumbent presidents having an advantage to be reelected, he was able to basically overcome any type of opposition that the conservative demographics of the country were extremely against. So that allowed his agenda in politics and left-wing politics to really seep in and solidify and gain anchor into this country. But it wasn't without costs and risk. So over his 8 years in office, he really imposed things, legislated things that were very, very anti-conservative, but also very anti-independent voter or independent thinker and non-politically affiliated voters. So what I mean specifically political party affiliated voters. And in fact, it reached a boiling point. So that was what Hillary had to wear around her neck. The previous 8 years of an Obama administration that tried to impose such far left social engineering onto this country that we weren't ready for. We actually tried to oppose in so many different ways that when it came time for the 2016 election, it was, again, this is obviously hindsight's always 2020 and in retrospect, but it makes sense that Hillary had a hill and a mountain to climb that would have been impossible for her to overcome. Again, as I said towards the beginning of this, she herself had a lot of negatives that were overwhelming, more than many other candidates before her. But it was just beyond her ability to overcome the previous administration's negatives as well. And so it makes sense in looking back at the 2016 election why it wasn't necessarily that Trump won, even though technically he did. It's that Hillary, Obama, and the left lost. I think that's a huge distinction to make, because that's going to, I believe, give some insight into the 2020 election coming up. Now, people who try to look at the 2018 midterm election as some kind of projection for 2020, I think are gravely mistaken, and there are those who would agree with that analysis, because I'll refer you to another to a previous ConservaCast where I did address this also. But the fact that historically the opposing party, in this case the Democrats to the president, have an advantage to take over the midterm. It's not as heavily involved. There aren't as many people who may vote or go out to vote. And even those who do may choose to stay home and not get as involved because the president is still in office. So without berating that specific issue, we can, I'm not going to say completely dismiss by any means, and it's still going to be a challenge. In fact, it's going to be a lot of work required to get Donald Trump reelected, and to be involved and to stay informed and to explain kind of the political landscape as it gets closer to 2020 to people. But the fact that this most recent midterm election of 2018 favored the Democrats, I believe in no way is a reflection of what will be the outcome of 2020. And mainly because there is still a strong animosity towards the left's agenda. Despite what the media would have you believe, despite what you may hear activists talk about, despite what the groupthink may want you to believe, there is a lot of rejection of what happened in the previous administration, i.e. Obama's nightmare. So come 2020, the candidates will, for the Democrat Party, interestingly, I believe, are going to make Obama's administration look moderate. They're going to make it look somewhat reasonable. I'm not saying that it by any means was, on the contrary. My point is that the candidates in 2020 are going to be so extreme that it will make Obama's administration look or appear as though it was somewhat moderate in comparison. I mean, the potential of a Bernie Sanders himself actually running again, or another candidate holding his mantle of socialism and progressivism is astonishing. I mean, you look at the bench of the Democrat candidates, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Senator Elizabeth Warren. Just even if they're not going to throw their hat in, the party as a whole, other people in the party are going to be on news networks, are going to be all over media promoting the far left agenda, the tenets of liberalism and progressivism. And it's going to backfire once again. Much like they invested so much time in trying to do character assassination against Justice Kavanaugh during his hearings, it wound up backfiring on them. And I think it's going to backfire again even more in the 2020 election. So we have to be prepared for what's going to come and educate other people, other conservatives, other independent thinkers, those who may not be aware of politics so much. But one thing to consider is the young generation, or the younger demographic of American voters. Now, typically, pattern-wise, they do tend to vote more Democrat and liberal. But there's an argument to be made, without throwing out a bunch of statistics, whether it's anecdotal or just people you know. Younger voters are now trending to be slightly more conservative. However slight that might be, whether it's because they're more informed, they're seeing the results of what previous older generations have experience with liberalism and progressivism, there seems to be a trend towards more conservative younger voters, which is obviously a good thing. Tend to be a little bit more pro-life, a little bit more fiscally conservative, don't see the efficacy of government-sponsored programs and agencies. There just tends to be a slighter, more conservative leaning, at least percentage-wise. Now, maybe not as a whole, as a group altogether, but the percentage has definitely started to increase to be more conservative. One of the things that you may have noticed is the backlash against what has been coined, or at least perpetuated out there as a term, fake news. And when I say fake news, I'm not talking about any type of talking points or Alex Jones or false flag stories. I'm talking about the fake news that they see on some of the major mainstream media news sources. And that goes even with some of the ones who claim to be more conservative, such as Fox News, InfoWars, CNN, MSNBC, all the mainstream big corporate sources of media. A lot of younger folks don't get why people are still tuning into them. They seem to be far more pragmatic. They don't seem to fall susceptible to the hype, to the over-exaggeration, the hyperbole, the groupthink of the mass media. Perhaps, and this is just coming from somebody close to me who has informed me of that age group, they're kind of sick of the fakeness overall. And that's understandable if you consider the phenomenon of social media. They're desensitized to what this fake impression of people is, this fake communication. When you engage in a social context with people who are on the other side of a computer, and they have a picture, they have a some kind of other figure that's not even human, it's just a cartoon, that represents an actual human being, they're far more accustomed to fakery. They can spot it a lot easier. And so they understand how quickly a news story becomes a fake news story. They can easily spot the ridiculous non-issues in the media. And that's an interesting point that I will be probably addressing far more in depth in another ConservaCast, but just kind of introducing that as a way or an argument to be made that a younger voting demographic may not be as reliable of a voting bloc for Democrats come 2020. So just to kind of wrap this up, why I think there's a good possibility of Trump winning in 2020, but also reflecting on why he technically won in 2016, but it was more that Obama, Hillary, and the left lost in 2016, and why I believe when Trump wins in 2020, I think it'll be again for that reason. But I think he's going to have an advantage to show his track record of his first term, to solidify his base, expand his support among others who weren't part of his base and who may have had initial trepidation to support him. But there's still going to be a very, very, very strong advantage for him that is the Democratic Party that is moving so far left that the conservative base as well as the independent base are just not having. They're just not going to fall for it. So history being on an incumbent president's side of being reelected, so long as he doesn't alienate his base, so long as he doesn't do anything extremely insane. And when I mean insane, I'm talking about actually launching nuclear weapons or putting American citizens in concentration camps of sorts like FDR did in World War II, and even he got reelected. But the fact that Trump doesn't look like he will do something so ridiculous that he'll alienate his base or even some of the independent voters, there stands a very good chance that he'll be reelected on his own merit, but also because of just the unacceptable progression of the Democrat Party. There is no moderate Democrat. There is no reasonable, sensible Democrat candidate who's going to run that would be able to cross over to independent voters and or especially not conservatives. And so just understanding the reality of political history, there's just no way that I believe, at least, that there will be a Democrat victory in 2012. Now, moving on to something that I'm just going to briefly throw out there. I don't know what's happened, nor do I really care what's happened to the AltRight movement. It was a lot of hype, I think. It was a lot of social media hype that may have gone out there. A lot of independent money that might have gone into it to just get attention, to get hits on the net and reach of people. But it's quickly died out. Even the term populist has now sort of died out. And these groups are still out there, the alt-right and the populist identifiers, but they're not nearly what they were during 2015, 2016. And I think that's important to take note of, because as we move forward to the 2020 election and in the next year and a half or 2 years, that we want to preserve the identity of being conservative. As conservatives, we want to define ourselves and be identifiable against and contrasting ourselves against the alt-right or populists. These were attempts to try and expand, if you will, the conservative identity. And even those who claim to be conservatives are at times either uninformed, confused, or even outright infiltrators of conservative politics. In order to try and blend in, identify, or disrupt some of our efforts. So I think it's important to remember that conservatives and the conservative agenda and ideology has sustainability. There are truths within conservatism that aren't going to disappear or go away in the next year or 2 or 3 or 4. So long as at least Conservatives Corner is around, there will be a conservative voice. Obviously, there are others who are out there, strong, solid conservative voices. But just recognizing that the alt-right and the populist ideology are not nearly as popular as they once were just a short time ago, and that we want to continue to champion those conservative ideas. So just as a reminder, being the season of giving, we aren't supported by any multi-million, billion-dollar news network. And so we do rely on your support to continue our efforts and to stand with us and support our desire to champion conservatism for generations to come. So please consider making a contribution to our GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner campaign. That is GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. Or again, you can visit our website, ConservativesCorner.com, and check out our beautiful, majestic mugs. And we want to invite you to strongly consider that this time of year. And we look forward to bringing you future ConservaCasts. If you haven't already, please check us out at GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. Once again, that's GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. Thanks for joining us once again, and we hope you will invite your friends and family to join us in our efforts to champion conservatism for generations to come.
But it wouldn't be nothing, not a woman or a girl.